they were going to cut my brand budget by 90%.
Did you say 90?
In that moment of pause, I realized my chosen response could be, I could flip this table upside down, flip them off and just head out, which I really, really, really wanted to do. Or I said, people would remember that, and I don't think that's a good memory. Or I could be like, handle it with grace. And I got up there and I joked, I said, hey, I feel as if I'm about to share my eulogy. And then I was very honest. I said, hey, there's no doubt that this number gives me pause. It creates a lot of tensions. And if that's the number, and we'll have to figure it out. So how does scarcity become abundance in terms of how we go forward?
You have developed a self-awareness of who you are and where you want to go. But now what? Sound familiar? In my 20 years of practice as a superior court mediator, clinician, executive coach, and parent, I've noticed one thing above all. No meaningful transformation can happen unless you find and apply the tools and skills that are right for you. See, the thing is, without tools, without a recipe, you might as well flip a coin and hope it works. Or you'll get burnt out listening to bad advice and following tips that just may not necessarily be useful in your situation. I have been there, and I've seen thousands of clients right there as well. My name is Deepa, and Recipes for Life is my show where you and I learn the ingredients of high-performing, well-adjusted humans and how they get through their own life, all to create a recipe for life of our own. Today's guest is Duke Stump. If you've not had the privilege of getting to know him, this is what you need to know. He's been the former VP of Product Marketing at Nike and had a tenure at Nike for 15 years. Duke was also the EVP of Community and Brand at Lulu and more recently CMO at Lime. To learn more about what he's up to now, you have to listen to our conversation. He shared about his upbringing, the values his parents instilled in him, how he deals with conflict, and the tools that he uses in his day-to-day life. One story that might surprise you involves him using a specific tool that gave him insight to quit Nike at the peak of his career. Peak of his career. Spoiler, it turns out it wasn't the peak. By the end of today's conversation, you will have new ingredients to explore ways of unlearning business in the traditional way that we have been conditioned to think and ask the most important question, and that is, what does the world need most that you are most uniquely qualified to offer? Much food for thought, and the ask is to think outside the box. Before we jump into the episode, I have one more ask. Teach what you've learned to someone you care about within 48 hours. Research shows that it'll help you internalize the tools beyond just listening to them. With much pleasure, I give you Duke Stump. One of the things that I've always often heard you say, what does the world need most that you're uniquely qualified to offer? Tell me all about this idea.
Man, that's a lot to unpack for the first question, but I love it. Thank you. I think the way I look at it is this. I think a lot of times when we look at ourselves or companies, we tend to play small because we hold ourselves as small. And so as an example, like when I was at Nike, we didn't say we were in the sneaker and tea business. We said we're in the business of bottling inspiration because what the world needed was this hefty amount of inspiration and innovation, and that was our role. And so when I asked that question, it's specific to one, like what makes you relevant, what's the need, and then also what's the niche or niche, which I think when you can establish a niche or niche in something, that to me isn't scarcity, it's the bullseye.
I love that. First of all, bottling inspiration, I think that's still so valid. Now tell me, if you were my coach and if you were to ask me this idea, How would you break it down? Like, how would I think about it? What is it that I am uniquely qualified to offer?
That's a good way. That's a great question because I would start with, let's for a second just obsolete the idea that you're a coach. Okay. So we're not going to use that word, but we are going to say, like, in the process of your work, what is it that you're delivering to people? What is the need that they have? And then on the outside, like, what do they walk away with? So you're beginning to understand, like, okay, like if I'm coaching in someone, like what is it you're delivering to them? What's relevant to them? And then what is the impact it has in their lives going forward? And to me, that's the lightning rod or the energy ball of what it is. And like said another way, there was one time I was working with a teacher and she was like, I'm a teacher, but I just feel stuck. And I said, okay, what is it that students need? Like, and they're like, they need to grow, they need to learn, and they need to develop. And I said, all right, well, you don't have to express this hourly, but hold your role as I'm a gardener. I'm there to grow kids on a daily basis. And for her, that kind of unlocked a lot of different energy for her in terms of how she approached the job, because it wasn't going into every day, I'm a teacher, which isn't a bad thing for a lot of people, but for her, she was stuck. So when she started viewing herself like, hey, I'm here to grow, I'm a gardener, I'm growing things, it just took on a different demeanor and I think energy for her that was quite helpful.
I really love that because as I'm thinking about the clients that I work with, so many people are stuck in like the day to day and the basics of their job. Like they have to do 20 different things. And I almost feel it's like this feels like a mini reset when you're stuck and you ask that question. You go back to what inspires you, what motivates you about doing what you do or what you love to do. Or if you feel like you've lost your way. Am I understanding this right as one of the ways of making this question work for somebody?
Yeah, I just think once again, I mean, the idea for me, there's a principle I use called widen the lens. And the question you asked at the beginning is fundamental to it. What does the world need most that you're most uniquely qualified to deliver? And widen the lens is just about changing the aperture, really looking bigger picture around, well, what is it what is my work really about? Or what is it that really makes me feel free or feel alive? Or versus, I think sometimes we're just stuck in these ruts and we can't get out. And so to me, I've seen it in business, I've seen it with individuals that when you have the courage or the curiosity to change the perspective of how you're looking at something, it can bring forth a lot more possibility and abundance. And it also can be really simple. It's not like you have to do a million different gyrations. It's just reframing how you look at things, what questions you're asking yourselves, et cetera, and then moving on from there.
I really like the possibility and abundance because most of the times when we're looking at a situation, I feel like sometimes we get so like wrapped into the situation that it's really hard for us to get out of it. But when we ask this question in our contextual situation, what does the world need most that you're uniquely qualified for? I almost feel like that just allows us to like look at different possibilities or just like take a step back.
Yeah, because I think what you really want to do is for people to be in inquiry at that moment. You want people to like, all right, I have to create a different level of awareness and understanding, but also possibility. And so I think once again, it forces you to look inward, to be reflective, like, well, what does the world need most that I'm most uniquely qualified to deliver? And maybe it's something that you've never really thought of or held before, And so I think that's the gift is that this idea to be in just constant inquiry and curiosity through, that question. What I've seen once again is we condition ourselves because we've been maybe like looking at things in a myopic manner, and that's all we know. And sometimes it just takes a little bit of a spark to be like, oh my God, there's a whole new world out there, but I just have to reframe how I'm looking at, myself and the world itself.
Some of the words that I'm catching is like spark and possibility and motivation and inquiry. And these all seem to be sort of like a couple of your themes that I see in most of your conversations. And curiosity and inquiry seems to be one of the most constant things that you apply to most of your life.
I would ask my dad a question and he would give me another question. He wouldn't give me an answer. And, growing up, it would drive me like literally batshit crazy because I was like, I just knew the answer. And he's like, he would ask another question. And I think the gift in that moment was the role of inquiry in our lives is such a powerful tool. But so often we want to live in statements. I mean, there's a great line and it's a U2 song. I think it's 12 o'clock or something like that is the song. And it says, it wasn't the answers we had right. It was the questions we had wrong or something like that. I mean, we didn't ask the question. We just went to some statements. And I think it's also interesting in today's world, like the resurrection of first principle thinking, like I know Elon Musk has kind of hijacked it, but really Aristotle was the one who was like, when you look at something, break it down into these components, these first principles and ask versus just immediately reacting to something. So you ask questions. So like in Musk's case, which I'm not pro or against, but when he was looking at space travel, he's like, well, why is that? Why is it done that way? Why is this done that way? Versus mimicking what's done and trying to make it better. They literally broke it down to individual pieces using first principle thinking. And I think that's when just the power of inquiry is such an amazing tool. And, but I don't think we're taught, once again, how inquiry can be this effective mechanism for us in life.
I totally agree with you. I mean, this whole idea that let's not be reactive, but be more self-reflective when a question is posed on us, I think completely changes how we have even the most basic conversations, right?
It totally does. So like, I know in your work, you do a lot of conflict resolution. So I think in those moments, to your point, you could react to things, or I think it could be like, all right, you could start asking questions. Well, why is this happening? From a sense of empathy, like, what are they feeling? Like, what's their path to get to this point, that led to this conflict? But there's the role of inquiry versus, once again, I think human nature is we just want to react to things and answer or make statements versus, a question has the power to take sometimes a really high tense moment and just diffuse it in a way that is really beautiful. And I feel like, once again, I'm obsessed with the role of inquiry. I'm not great at it. It's a constant practice, but when it's done well for me, I think it's really, honestly, it's a powerful tool.
Well, Duke, I actually would have to challenge you when you say you're not great at it, because I've really seen you do this all the time. In all the conversations and all the meetings and all the board meetings that we've been together, I think inquiry has been your key thing, like the way you say the question. So I just want to acknowledge that for a quick second. I also want to circle back to your dad. By the way, I feel like he was a coach. What did he do for a job? Like everything you're saying to me, he's like a therapist / a coach.
Well, he was literally a coach early on. I mean, he was an amazing athlete in school. He went to Northwestern University. He played football and baseball there. And then he became a high school teacher and a high school coach. So he coached football and baseball. And my mom was the dean of students and was teaching as well early on. And he coached me throughout my life in sport, which was great. There's this Harvard philosopher who, when the students take his class, they really don't enjoy it. They take his class and their biggest beef was that was very unsatisfying. It didn't give me the answers I needed. And then years later, when they reflect back on the class, they're like, it was the most profound and most significant class I took because he was teaching us how to think. And I feel like that's one of the things my dad did really well through me serving a question and his coaching back was another question he was really once again conditioning me to like, okay, I need to be thinking, I need to think about this versus I think sometimes we get lazy. Give me the answer. And that would, in doing so, I don't think if we really truly understand the essence of things, we truly know things. But through my dad's mechanism, I was like, all right, I got to really understand this. Then great. I mean, there was one time early on in my Nike career, I was like, hey, I want to go on my own and create my own thing. It was like 2 years in. I was like, whatever. And I thought, like, hey, like, and he just asked me a bunch of questions. He didn't say, wow, I think that's pretty foolish at this point, which it really would have been given what I, was thinking about doing. But I also respect how he approached that. He was like, you need to come to your own conclusion, but I'll help you through inquiry.
Oh my God, Duke, I love that. As someone who does work with parents all the time, I just wish there was a way to translate that specific way of talking to your children in the moment. Because what it does, and what I'm hearing you say, and what I'm seeing in your own life, is that it really doesn't give us the answers that we need or want. It just allows us to like think for ourselves.
I think that's just it, Deepa. The ability to think for ourselves is a superpower. It's when, I also think it's a confidence builder. When you feel like, all right, I can think for myself on things. I think in many ways you feel like you can take on the world at a different capacity. And so, yeah, once again, I'm just really curious, and I appreciate you saying that you think I'm good around the role of inquiry. My dad would thank you if he was around, but it's just it's interesting, and I'm also just observing. I love observing meetings and dynamics and like what's working, what's not working. And I think when people surface brilliant, burning questions, it's amazing. But if it's a bunch of people shooting over answers, I don't know how effective that is, especially compared to burning questions.
I absolutely agree with you. I want to do one quick thing before we move on to another question is that you mentioned that you were so frustrated sometimes when your dad wouldn't give me the answers. What was that process? Like, just break it down a little bit. Like, you were frustrated, and then what did you do with the question?
Well, it was a one-way street for me, which was I had to go back and figure it out of myself. Like he literally he was unyielding around, I would be like, I just see an answer. He's like, no, like and so I had to literally just and I do think everything in life is so many things are a practice, the muscle. And so there was times it'd be easy and sometimes it would be hard, but I would constantly be like, all right, I got to figure this out. So how am I going to do this? And what are the things I need to ask myself, or how do I need to look at this experience in a different way? But it was really, I mean, gosh, I'm just so grateful for that as a learning condition for me, for my, my parents early on, just because I don't see that enough. And I think, I think we live in a culture that wants instant gratification. So tell me the answer, I'll get things done, and I'll move on. And once again, I think what's lost in that translation is truly understanding the essence of things. But if we can somehow just let go of the desire for instant gratification and just be like, okay, I'm going to slow down here. And there's a horse saying, slow down to hurry up. I'm going to slow down, understand things in a way that once you know that, then you're on a completely different jet stream.
Yeah. Then you can run.
Goes against the grain, right? Like everything is about, hey, Google or, Chat GPTs.
Yeah. I love that idea because what you're really talking about when you had to rely on your own self, you're talking about developing your agency at a very young age, relying on yourself and being okay with not knowing the answers and being comfortable with the uncertainty of not knowing the answers. And I think that's one of the key things that we are not allowing our like young minds to develop.
Yeah. Obviously, like, I love when Krishnamurti talks about the beauty of not knowing. And I think that's another thing we've been conditioned around, which is if you don't know something, then you're missing, or you're less than, or whatever. And, Krishnamurti with his quote, to know is to be in prison and to not know is to be free. And I do feel that in this world where we want to know we want predictive outcomes and all that, if you can let go of that, I do think you can be free. And I think that's where not having to have all the answers, having to really even say, like, I don't even know if I know the right burning question right now. And I'll just sit on it for a while. Like, those are all interesting things. But those are the things that when you can, to your point, when you can have agency, like, wow, like that is that is a superpower, right? Because then you're like, okay, I can take on a lot, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah.
That,
And added to that, free from fear. Like fear is so conditioned. And you and I, and in our world of Krishnamurti and Oak Grove School, we talk about this all the time. That's one of the tenets of it. How do we uncondition ourselves from like just being fearful of everything? And then, but then the brilliant idea of developing agency from a very young age, that it in itself will allow us to be less fearful of what we want to do with our life.
yeah, and we're all different, right? And I think there's nature, nurture, and however we've developed. But with my parents, I mean, my my mom was a dreamer. I grew up a dream, I've grown up to be a dreamer. And the fear thing, you know, it it wasn't really part of our world, meaning we always looked at around challenges not as threats, but as possibility. And we knew that doesn't mean it always is going to go our way. Like, in fact, there's a lot of times it doesn't. But even there's this amazing, he's no longer at Harvard, Sean Aker. He did this world study on human contentment and happiness. And he studied the most content, happiest people in the world. And one of the conditions, there was three in particular, but one was when you're confronted with an obstacle, do you look at it as a place of fear or a challenge, or do you look at it as, okay, this is a possibility or an opportunity? And the people in it as possibility or opportunity tended to be far more content and happier in the world. And once again, it doesn't mean everything goes your way. So I just want to be clear on that. But it's your approach. And so for me, I was just blessed with parents that were like, when you have these moments, Viktor Frankl, between stimuli and response, you have this magic space. Like, well, how do you want to hold it? That they conditioned to be like, think of it as a possibility and work from inspiration, not desperation. And so the fear piece, I've seen it. Like, I've seen it so often in company culture where fear can easily penetrate a company
Totally.
and
Mhm.
cancer cell that just spreads. And, that's why if we look at the global engagement studies, people are miserable for the most part. It's like, I get it, because leadership was leading by fear. And it just has a domino effect on the rest of the culture.
Yeah, as opposed to leadership looking at it or leading with possibilities. What a change! Like it's just like what a difference in how cultures could just maybe not thrive, and there's going to be failure, there's going to be success, but there's at least going to be that, hey, there's less fear, there's more possibility about what we can achieve and what we can do.
Yeah. So I'll give you an example. I was at this company called Line, which is the world's largest micromobility company. And all the executives, we were in a meeting, and the number one market in the world was Germany, but it hadn't opened up. And all of a sudden, we got the notice that the government was going to open it up. They were only going to take 3 vendors, um, and it was going to be in 5 weeks. And what it required was specific product and everything. And we got one of the 3 spots. And I remember that meeting, it was just like borderline chaos. Like, everyone's like, how are we going to do this? And I'm an introvert. And so, but I was like, hey, for a moment, what if we shifted our perspective? What would it look like and feel like if we actually did this in 5 weeks? Like, what would that take? What if we rebuilt a product and delivered it with all the regulations in 5 weeks? What if we created the brand experience and everything and did all, and our number one quote unquote competitor at the time was German. And so it was like, that's all right. Like, they're ahead in the race now because they know the market. But what do we need to do? In that moment, I was like, what do we need to do to out German the Germans? Like, how can we actually take a leadership point of view? And I remember they all like paused and they were like, God, that's a really cool way to hold it. They're like, and that feels a lot better than this desperate mode. And long story short, we crushed it. Like in 5 weeks, we delivered across the board. It was euphoric for our culture because it was like, wow, we did this. Like against all odds, we climbed Everest without oxygen and like scaled it. And I think so much of that was just okay in that moment. Is this a threat or an opportunity? And so it was vital for us, I think, to shift as a leadership team to be like, don't know if we can do this. It's going to be challenging, but man, let's give it like a best effort and see where it goes.
Duke, I love that story. It almost is, it's not being unrealistic because a lot of people, when I talk about positivity, they're like, oh, you just want to code, just make people feel better. But what I'm actually hearing you say is that realistic, but also this whole possibility of what if it was like amazing at the end of 5 weeks? What if it was successful? I just love how, in a very minute way, we kind of shifted, or you kind of shifted the whole, energy of your team, your group, the project, and everything else. And it was just simple.
It was pretty simple in the terms of the framework. Getting everybody on board was a little bit more challenging, but that's where I think hope is a very interesting word. Hope by itself, I think, can be a little soft, but when there's hope as a consequence of action, I think it's completely different. And so what we were delivering along the way was a sense of hope because we were in action around these things. It wasn't like, hey, we can do it, and then we'll just, hope, maybe by some miracle we'll do it in 5 weeks. We were like, every day we had an update. How are we doing? And then momentum started fueling it, and everyone was like, dang, man, I think we can pull this off. Like on the brand side, I was the chief marketing officer. And going back to like one of the questions we had was like, all right, we're in San Francisco. We're not in Germany. We got to partner with somebody who knows. So we found this amazing creative group in Berlin, like amazing. And they were like, and we just trusted them. We're like, all right, you got to help us like in this thing. And all of those moments when we were sharing, we're just fueling people. We like, all right, hope is building. Like we can do this because the actions around it. And the product team was like, hey, we just passed the standards for the German regulation. It was like, I just remember everyone was applause was like, that's crazy. Like something 3 weeks ago we thought was impossible was just done.
I love that. I almost feel like I was with you in those moments, but even as you're like resharing everything that happened, I don't know how many ever months, years ago, I'm like, oh my God, the energy is very positive and active as opposed to negative and fear-based. I love that. Okay, so Duke, quickly, you said something in all of this that you're an introvert.
It's probably the introvert ambivert spectrum. If you've ever read the book Quiet, I can go out into the world, and when I need to do what I need to do, I'll do it. Like I think it's for me, it's because I like dreaming, and I don't want to give up on dreams. And so I'm happy to go out, even though at times it makes me wildly uncomfortable. Like even doing this is pushing me like to like, okay. But if I can carve out most days, I would be living in solitude like we do and just be in nature with the animals. Like that's what fuels me.
I don't know, Duke. By the way, I love the book Quiet. Great shout out for that book. I almost think like you're an ambivert because I see you when I see you, and we're together in like many social settings, especially at the school level, right? Because we're on the board together, and I see you like really like enjoying that space, and I can almost also see you like, oh my God, Molly and I were loving hanging out in our like farm with all the animals and our horse. And the girls drop by, and I can see both of that. So I almost feel like you have this like really beautiful, I don't know, balance of both being an introvert and an extrovert.
I think for me, it's like, I also, for me, recognize that one of the few times I know I'm growing when I'm uncomfortable. And so I put myself in positions where I'm uncomfortable. Because what's important to me, just as a value, is that I want to be constantly learning and growing. And so I know I have to do things that probably don't necessarily, it's not top of my list, but I want to deliver on greatness. It doesn't mean in fact, a lot of times I don't deliver on greatness, but if I'm going to do something, I want to commit to it and give it like the best effort out of integrity that I can. And so, um, yeah, so I'll show up in those meetings with you, Deepa.
Oh, you better. You're also the co-chair for our 50th anniversary, which I'm super grateful for. Oh my gosh. So tell me something. Put myself in positions that are uncomfortable. For my amazing audience, is there like a step-by-step sort of a guide or something that you can tell people to how does one put themselves in uncomfortable positions or situations?
Yeah, I mean, that goes back to, I think, even the role of curiosity.
Yeah.
I'm a high observer. So I'm like, hey, what am I curious about like in this world right now? Um, and also like, what are the things that fuel me, that make me feel free? And I love when I do things that make me feel alive. And so I guess an example, this past summer, I'm really curious about the role of language in the world of business culture today. I just feel like it's very lazy, very militaristic, target, acquire, like it's, I just am like, wow, that doesn't seem right. And then I read David White's book, Heart Aroused, when he talks about, soul and business and things. I was like, wow, like I think he says the language of business today doesn't speak to a larger territory ahead. And I was like, I'm super curious about that thought. So what would that look like? So I took a poetry class. You know, I signed up for this online poetry class, and it wasn't a fluff poetry class. Like it was hard. It was 7 weeks. Um, the irony, it was from a classmate of mine from 40 years ago at boarding school. And he's gone on to be this revered poet, this resident at the Langston Hughes home in Harlem. He's just incredible. But it literally kicked my ass. I was so uncomfortable because I went into it. I didn't know. I didn't know the difference between a sonnet and a villanelle and iambic pentameter. And we would read poems. He's like, what are you reading? And he would share what his takeaway would be from a line. And I'm like, I have no idea how he got there. Like, that is incredible. But at the end of that journey, just was so grateful because I learned a lot. In going back to agency, I was like, wow, I know there's a path for language here that I feel like it can embark on. And, so that all of that really stems from, what am I curious about? What's out there right now that I'm sensing or signals that's interesting, and ask myself, like, does it make me feel free, and does it make me feel alive? And if it checks a lot of those boxes, I'm like, yeah, like you're going to laugh, but my next thing is I told Molly, my wife, like, I have to learn how to play the ukulele. Don't ask me why.
Well, Duke, poetry and ukulele. How about we have a goal for you for our December meeting?
Well, I have a poetry slam, and then I'll just bust out live music.
There you go. But I love these questions. So when we really want to put ourselves in, or challenge ourselves, or challenge when they're in static mode, what am I curious about? What are the things that make me feel free? And for you, one of the recent things that you did was, when you were asking these questions, especially around, language, around business and what's happening right now, you took a poetry class. And I know I'm not asked you this, but poem you can share that you wrote. You don't have to, but
I would actually be happy to read. I don't have one in front of me, but David, our teacher, was like, put your poetry out there in the world. He's like, you need to do that. But if I had one, I would. There's one on the relationship between a horse and a human. It's called Hästen. It's Swedish for horse. And I just talked about the energy because horses feel a human's energy well before you get to them. And so it was this dynamic, of like breathing and not bringing fear. Like, if you bring fear to a horse, not a good thing. According to David Mills, the teacher, I do need to throw it out there.
All right, Duke. So I'm gonna do this accountability thing that I do with all my coaches. So we're on October 10th, and how about we listen to your poetry on Bonfire with Soul in 2 weeks?
I 2 to 3 weeks I can do it. I'll even post it. I'll just say, hey, deep challenge inspired
You're an
me to
accountability person, inspired and accountable.
that. Yep, but I'll
Okay.
do that.
Okay, excellent. I have it down. So, I'm going to follow up with you on it. I'm going to text you. So, Bonfire brings me to the next question. So, you're doing this like amazing Bonfire with Soul, which I just started with you. I joined this course. So, tell my audience a little bit more about the idea behind Bonfire with Soul.
Yeah, so I mean, I feel fortunate. I've lived a diverse range of different business environments and cultures. So I've been a part of large billion-dollar public health brands. I've been a part of startups. I've been a part of smaller private enterprise. I've been a part of nonprofit. And once again, as an introvert, ambivert, and even I think from my mom, who was an engineering mind, I'm not really curious how things work. And so part of my burning question for me is like, why am I in environments where things are flourishing, and why do I go to certain environments when they're languishing? And so over the last 30 years, I've been operating on these 12 principles that I have. Each has also a burning question attached to it. And so during COVID, I needed a creative outlet. And I said, you know what, I'm going to create a new school of thought around business, but it's about unlearning business as usual. And I really wanted to also just bring in much more of the human element of things that are important in business. So compassion, empathy, courage, conviction, rigor. Um, and it's been fun. I mean, it's an online learning course. I did the first two cohorts. 1,000 people from 35 countries showed up for the first two. I was kind of blown away by that. I wasn't expecting that. Um, I guess a lot of people are yearning to unlearn business as usual. And it makes sense given the state of business culture today. And so then, yeah, I just launched the new, after almost 900 days of pausing, I launched the third cohort again. And a couple weeks ago, of which you are kind enough to join in and participate.
I love that. So the two takeaways that I got from it is a new school of thought in just doing business today without even, talking about everything else that's happening. And also specifically bringing in the human element of it. So let me ask you this. Is Bonfire's sole idea to replace core business academics, or should it be treated as like a complementary or elective course to unlearn some of the practices currently taught today?
That's a really good question because my answer is probably going to be more radical than what people would think. But I love Buckminster Fuller. I think he was the Da Vinci of our time, just an amazing thinker, system thinker. And he would have this thought is, if you want to change existing reality, obsolete what currently exists. And so as much as I would love to like blend or merge like conventional teaching with my thinking, I just would rather invite not just my voice, but other new voices around a new school of thought and build from there, independent of the current teaching. Because I think the other thing is, I half jokingly said my goal is to make Harvard Business School obsolete.
You said that, yes.
But the half joking part is, if business school and all that teaching is growing so well, then why is it the output, the actual, when I look at the global engagement studies and 80% of people aren't engaged at work, quitting is a dominant feature in most cultures. 50% wouldn't wish their job on their worst enemy. There's scared, Sunday scaries and Blue Mondays. If the status quo was great, I'd be like, hey, why change it? But my foe in this endeavor is the acceptance of that status quo. And I've lived in cultures that have been rich and beautiful. And I think it's sad that people don't want to go to work on Monday. The vast majority of my life, I love Monday. I just think work is great. And so as not an antagonist, but as an inspired protagonist, my goal is to spark a different conversation on how we could operate business from a different perspective.
What are your thoughts on Bonfire at the high school level? Because you and I are very so inspired and motivated by Krishnamurti and Oak Grove. You moved here to send your children here. I moved here to send Surya here. So what are your thoughts on teaching this at the high school level? or even, I don't know, younger kids?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I don't have to, I don't know if you would take one of the principles. One of the principles I talk about is live empathy. I think empathy as an element in business is so often not even understood. It's not nurtured. It's not cultivated. And so, how is it we could learn this muscle around empathy so that we really truly understand the essence of things? To me, I think what's nice about, let's take Oak Grove School as a model. And this, I think for me, Oak Grove is always about the wholeness of life. You're putting individuals in this experience that give them this rich soil around the wholeness of life, and they're learning empathy. Right? You can't have 15, 18 kids or humans per grade and live with them day to day and not have to understand them. And I think the school does a really nice job of ensuring that there's a level of empathy within the school structure, classroom structure, whatever. And so whether it's a direct translation of some of the principles or taking the intention behind some of the principles, yeah, like empathy, courage, compassion, um, rigor, I think those are all things that would be helpful beyond just the standard level of pedagogy that we're taught.
So, Duke, what are one or two tools or practices that you can maybe tell our audience when you talk about developing empathy, courage, rigor, compassion, that all the things that you feel are not only critical for just us in our interpersonal level or as humans, but also in business? So, is there like a practice or like a tool that you would recommend?
So the last principle is kind of my favorite principle, and it's dare to suck. And I think it really is about courage. Honestly, that's what that whole principle is about. And for me, it's about, you can't just say, "Hey, be courageous." I think like that's not going to help, right? Obviously, but I break it down in the course, and I share this exercise that was shared with me, which is start with this whole thing of imagine a day. Your 2 feet hit the ground, and you're super excited for the day. You're like, this is what a day looks like that I enjoy, that fuels me. You're not talking about I have this job and I make this much money or whatever. You're just like, this is a day. And it's a day because you're not distinguishing or bifurcating your personal life from your work life. You're blending those in a way that there's like this greater sense of flow between the two. And then in that exercise, what Molly and I have done it together in the past, we just begin to like plot on paper, like, okay, this is what a day looks like. This is what would really fuel us. And then once you have this mosaic and this picture, the next question is like, all right, well, what's preventing you from living that day? That is really cool stuff for introspective inquiry because you're like, and as an example, when I decided I was ready to leave Nike after 16 years, nobody leaves Nike. I mean, and for me as a former athlete, it's like, it's my identity. I'm Nike. I'm a Nike guy. Like, that's a pretty interesting thing. At least it was. And um, I realized the two things for me that were preventing were ego, letting go of Nike as my identity, and finances. So I was like, this place has been really good to us. Like, why would I want to leave that? But I also realized that, and this is the second part of that exercise, when I asked myself what makes me feel free or alive, or Molly asked that, I didn't feel I was going to continue to grow. I could next 16 years. And for me, that was painful. I was like, I don't want that. I want to be thrown into environments like that poetry class where I can be uncomfortable again, because then I'll know I'm growing. And I went from Nike to seventh generation, which at the time was 50 people, $50 million, small environmental household good product company in Burlington, Vermont. But it was pioneering corporate responsibility. Like, I remember my first meeting at seventh generation, I was with Greenpeace. And I was like, okay, I never thought I'd be in a meeting with Greenpeace, but here I am because we were partnering with them on this college activist program. And so this idea of imagining in a day versus like, what's your career like? That's a lot to hold for me and my small brain, but I could draw with Molly, my wife, a portrait of a day. I could identify the things that make me feel free and alive, like culture, what kind of culture, but also just internally, am I letting go of certain fears, whatever. And that's what I've been using all along. And it's once again, it's not for everybody. And there's some people who are in positions that they love, and I'm like, that's amazing. Like that's great. I think for me, I always had this constant itch, and maybe because I'm a dreamer as a kid growing up. I'm always like, it wasn't about never having enough, but I was curious to be like, wow, I have like this itch to do this or this. Like, and so if I felt that way, I was like, yeah, I'm going to do that. I want to do that. It's like creating Bonfire with Soul. That was part of my master plan. It made me wildly uncomfortable to like put myself out there, but I was like, I will be really disappointed if I don't do this. The pain of not doing it is worse than the pain of doing it and failing.
Oh my Lord, Duke, there's so many things over here. The first thing that comes to my mind is almost like, can we do this workshop with our high school children at Oak Grove, where it would be called like a fun afternoon of Dare to Suck? Imagine in the day. Because, as much as Oak Grove does these amazing things, I always, working with so many young high schoolers, young adults, Dare to Suck is such a brilliant concept, I feel. Just even sitting with that for a moment, like being okay with that without even going to the exercise. And the other thing, what's preventing me, once you do Imagine a Day, what's preventing me from living this day? I love that. And so when you did that exercise, do you remember a critical point on your life and you did that exercise, and what was the outcome of that?
Well, I made the decision to leave Nike. um, and I remember one of the executives at Nike was like, hey, you've just committed career suicide. And I was like, I'm good. I'm really at peace with this decision because I had done the work. It wasn't an impulse thing. Um, And I went to Seventh Generation and I was the chief marketing officer. I loved it. It was like a whole new, I always say I learned to roll a solo business at Seventh Generation. And it was just a remarkable journey that set me on all these other different paths. And so I am forever grateful for that. It doesn't mean, by the way, like, and I've done that exercise where I wanted to go on my own. And so I went on my own. I left Seventh Generation to go on my own 2 months before the financial crisis in 2008, which obviously terrible timing. And that was a rough period. But what was amazing was Molly was incredibly supportive. I think finding somebody in your life that it's good to have the rational people. I also think it's good to have somebody who's just, I think, your biggest cheerleader. Like I just watched the Tanya Tucker documentary on Netflix, and who, for those of you who don't know, Tanya Tucker was an icon country singer, 70s, 80s. But to see Brandi Carlile, who's an amazing contemporary artist, the way she lifted up Tanya Tucker to create an amazing album 2 decades after the last album was amazing. So I think it helps when you have those people, especially in those like turbulent times. But my point really was not everything goes well. And once again, that's that moment where we're like, all right, what's my chosen response? And I think, another thing we can teach in school is just resiliency, because things don't go your way, and you think, yeah, it's how do you respond to that? Like my dad was great at that in sports. Like if I was benched in a game for whatever reason, a coach was like, hey, you're benched. My dad was like, you have 2 options. You can get mad at the coach. That's one thing. Or you could look at yourself like, what do I need to do to get back out there on the field or on the ice? Yeah, I hope you choose the latter. Like, because the first thing's not going to get you anywhere, And that is many times to kind of gave me direction with answers. He's like, you can choose, but going back to resiliency, his thing was like, accept it. This is not good. I'm on the bench, but you can control how you want to respond. And so use that as from a positive path, not this like anger.
I can almost translate that, Duke, that concept and that way of thinking to a lot of my coaches who look at receiving, or leaders or managers who are wanting to scale, look at receiving feedback. So when you receive feedback, That's just such an amazing shift of saying, of letting your ego come into play or not listening or saying, what's the, this is like, I didn't expect this, or feeling defensive or resistant towards that feedback. How about we just shifted that to say, and just completely what you said, like, maybe there's something to it. Maybe there's something over here. Maybe I can explore what my manager or leader said in this feedback, and maybe I can improve. Maybe I can change.
Yeah. The only thing I'll add on that, and it's my own growth opportunity, is I do much better on feedback when I feel the source, I trust the source and respect the source. Then I can take really any feedback. I think when it comes from sources that I may not have the ultimate respect for or trust with, then it becomes a little bit more challenging. And that to me is something that I need to work on, obviously, I think, because I'm more challenged when it's that dynamic.
That completely makes sense. And then what we're really talking about when you talk about trust is the relationship that's built between teams and managers and leaders, or the culture of trust that's built in companies, right? When there's a certain level of trust built in, or people make the effort to build that together, then you can receive feedback, or you can give feedback more freely. When that fundamental trust is not there, then it's just much more harder.
Yeah. I think a big part of that for me is there's a horse idiom that says, a horse doesn't care how much you know, it wants to know how much you care. And I think when you're part of a leadership group or you have a mentor or a coach, and even if their feedback is like candid or tough, as long as it's placed from a place of caring, you're like, it's good. And so to me, that another reason I created Bonfire with Soul is like, I think the leadership world needs to shift. It literally needs to create environments that create a world of caring, create a world of trust, create a world of empowerment, create a world of psychological safety. Because when you have that, then people will literally like run through a brick wall to get things done. But when you don't have that, it's just, and maybe that's me trying to even solve my own kind of issues where I feel I fall short, is like when I don't feel like people care or there's not trust, then I don't do a good job of receiving feedback. And so, but I've seen personally on the opposite side, when it's not fear based and it's from a place of possibility and it's from a place of caring, doesn't mean you can't give candid feedback. I love candid feedback that's kind. Like that's great, especially from people I love. Like you'll experience a couple. One of my mentors will be a speaker at Bonfire, hands down one of the best leaders I've ever been a part of. He's given me some really tough feedback over the years, but I could take anything from him because I know he cared.
Dude, this almost reminds me of, and very briefly, I do want to talk about conflict with you. And, when there's these cultures that have not done the work, business cultures or small business organizations or teams that haven't done the work to build the trust, and there's this moment where, there's, feedback is given, or there's some like tension. How does one actually, in the most authentic way, deal with something like that? Have you had can you tell us a story or experience you had around conflict?
Yeah, I mean, once again, conflict is another way to hold it sometimes is just tension. And I think there's healthy tension. In fact, tension is great in many ways. And then there's just bad tension. I think when there's creative tension, conflict of ideas, and direction, whatever, as long as there's trust and caring and respect, I think that's when you can drop in an inquiry. You're probably more empathetic. Um, I just think it's a different dynamic in energy and behavior. It's when the tension comes from a place of when there is fear, when there isn't a great sense of respect or trust amongst a group. This is where I probably would lean on you, Deepa, to bring in some more expertise and wisdom, because that is the hardest piece. Like I just had a buddy who was great. He's an amazing entrepreneur. They started a new company. He already could sense amongst a small group there was different energy. And then he walked him back and he did these really beautiful team exercises, and not in a way that everyone could see each other again. Like I think that's the other thing is going back to empathy. Do we really know and see each other in the right way? And I think so. We have a mask or we're surface travelers. And I think cultures that take the time to create environments where people can be seen and heard, especially at the leadership level, because if it doesn't work there, chances are it's not going to work the rest of the culture.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
it's interesting, but it's a proverbial thing in my life, which is like, all right, how when it's in that bad tension mode, what's my step? And I'm trying as a practice just not to react. Um, Actually, here's a good example.
Okay,
When
I
I
love examples.
Yeah, when I was at Lime, we're at the executive. We had an executive offsite, and the founders were challenging, truthfully, and they were going to cut my brand budget by 90%.
Did you say
Yeah,
90?
0. And that chief finance officer is like, dude, just a heads up. And it wasn't. And I just remember like one of the founders like, hey, we're going to go around the room and tell you your budget, and you have to get up and talk about. And so it gets to me, and it's like, hey, Duke, here's your budget. And in that moment, what saved me is I did, through my experience to Lululemon and Molly Bain Yoga, I just did a quick pranayama, 4 seconds and I did that 3 times because it was like there was awkward silence. In that moment of pause, I realized my chosen response could be, I could flip this table upside down, flip them off and just head out, which I really, really, really wanted to do. Or I said, people would remember that, and I don't think that's a good memory. Or I could be like, handle it with grace. And I got up there and I joked. I said, hey, I feel as if I'm about to share my eulogy. And then I was very honest. I said, hey, there's no doubt that this number gives me pause. It creates a lot of tensions. And if that's the number, and we'll have to figure it out. So how does scarcity become abundance in terms of how we go forward? And I remember afterwards, the CFO and then the president were like, how did you, like, that was really a masterclass, because how did you not just go crazy? Because we all would have just lost it. And I was like, the breath saved me. It literally saved me. Maya Angelou would always say, who do you want to bring on your shoulder to meetings? And I was like, I want someone like Mandela or somebody on my thing, not some raving lunatic. That was one of the few times it worked well. There's a lot of other stories where it didn't, by the way.
Well, thank you for saying that, because I do want to acknowledge that by us talking about all of these things, we're not saying it's going to work well every time. We're saying give it a try and see if it works or not, right? So here's the thing, not to react right away, to do almost like a few seconds, even if it's like 30, 60 seconds of just box meditation, and then to handle with grace and to like really not throw more fuel into the fire, but see what are the questions and possibilities we can ask with what is in front of us. It's a most important situation ever in that moment, in that context. But instead of adding more fuel to the fire, like, what are the questions that I can ask, or how do I respond to this with grace? Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Yeah. And I think in that last part of the grace, it was like in that moment of breathing and just like literally a million thoughts coming and just trying to filter through. I was like, what's my desired effect? And I didn't want them to be like, this guy is just a live wire. I wanted them to be like, wow, that he's a really interesting leader. Like, he took what most people would be demoralizing, and he's like, no, I'm going to handle this with grace. And so I focused on what is the emotion or the feeling that I wanted to create coming out of it. And that's where I landed on, I just want to enter this with grace. That's how I'm going to have this conversation.
I really want to give a big shout out to like breath work in the moment. I get a lot of clients, coaching clients and everybody that asks me, when there's like high emotions, when there's dysregulation of your emotions, when you're triggered by certain things, what is the thing that will come as the most in that second for us to be able to actively have a conversation and not have a triggered response to whatever's happening in that moment? And I think I really want to acknowledge this breath work, even if it takes 30 seconds. And like you said, it was maybe a little bit awkward because there was silence, but it allowed you to regulate your emotions for even in that moment, not fully, but to respond in the way that you felt was more authentic to you.
I love what you're sharing. I mean, we practice breath work to open up every live session at Bonfire. I think breath is it's universal. It's universally accessible. There's no bias. Who can learn? There's a
It's
great book,
free.
James. I forget his last name, and it's basically talks about the power of the lost art of breath. I think people really understood breath centuries ago, and then it's been lost. But it's also a practice. So, for example, like I would encourage people to learn about box breathing as one technique, for example. And next time you're in a moment, you're at the airport, there's a long line, just do a breath. Or if you're in a moment at a grocery store and it's crazy in a line, breathe. But the breath, and once again, it's a practice. And there's days I do it great, and there's moments I don't do it. But it is unquestionably one of the most effective tools. And that's why going back to like, what do we need to unlearn? Why can't we learn breath? Like literally, why cannot we teach people breathing techniques? I mean, Rick Rubin, the amazing music producer, I loved it. He was on 60 Minutes. He was being interviewed by Anderson Cooper. Anderson Cooper jumps into a question, and Rick Rubin's like, "Hey, can we pause for a second?" But like Rick Rubin gets it. He's like, "No, like let's eliminate the frenetic, awkward interview thing. Let's be grounded, and then we can have the chat." It was beautiful.
What? Yeah. Well, so let's do this for a minute. When we talk about like specific breath work, when they are asking people, hey, when you're getting upset while you're driving and somebody cuts you off, or you're in an airport, or you're with your manager and it's frustrating, like how does one actually implement the breath work? So you do it, Duke, and then I'll follow you for just 60 seconds.
Okay. In an ideal world, if you wanted to do it, you would be seated, feet on the ground, hands on your thighs. But even if you're at the airport, right? It's all through your nose. So you're going to do, in fact, there's a whole new world of thinking around breath through nose versus mouth, but your mouth's closed, and you're going to do a box. Think of a square. So we're going to go up one side. So we're going to breathe in for 4 seconds through our nose, hold it for 4 seconds as we go across, exhale, breathe in, and you're just going to continue that breathing in, hold, exhale, breathe in, but you're all through your nose. And
okay, so let's do this.
All right, you ready? All right, here we go. We're gonna breathe in for 4 seconds through our nose, mouth's closed. Ready? Hold for 4. Exhale for 4. Inhale. Hold for 4. Exhale. Let go. I just think those are like the things for me, once again, that are interesting. It's all these unique perspectives on what does it take to create culture and business and things that are flourishing. And I don't think we would look at breath as something interesting, but for me, it's super important. And we have 3 yogis that are part of Bonfire with Soul. And we used to do that, by the way, when I was at Lululemon as a C-suite and executive team. We started every meeting 5 minutes with meditation and breath. And what I found so profound, because we're all different. We're all coming flying in from different other meetings. It's kind of like this crazy frenetic energy. And then after that 5 minutes, it was visibly noticeable, like it was a completely different verb for the rest of the time we were together.
Yeah. And, in my world, when we also talk about dysregulation, regulation, it's also like when we look at anxiety and the things that really come in our way of just really operating sometimes, the calming of the central nervous system is one of the most important things that is done by breathwork. So how do you really calm yourself down without any external thing, but this is more an internal thing that you develop, right?
And you're right, it's free. It's like, wow, we all can do this and it can be incredibly effective. It's amazing.
All can do this all the time to our advantage. All right, Duke, almost as we're winding down, what's next for you after Bonfire? What does your current day in the life look like?
It's interesting. I'm definitely curious about a couple things, like what is the evolution of Bonfire? And I have some dreams and thoughts around that. Also, like my curiosity is, hey, are there places and companies and brands that I would like to be a part of? And as I get older, that list gets shorter and shorter and shorter. But there are some interesting places out there that I think are that pique my interest. But yeah, the bonfire thing. I mean, I think teaching for me, what I love about teaching is that it's a learning journey for everybody, and that I'm the mentor and I'm the mentee. And
Mm.
I really love that aspect. Like you can experience it a little bit right now on Bonfire, like all these really interesting people that are, I think, sharing their voice and questions around things. That does make me feel free and alive, to be in an environment like that. And so the teaching aspect, and my parents were starting out as high school teachers, so I think it's in my genetic code in some way. Is like it's a very interesting endeavor and journey that I'm still kind of pondering. Like, all right, well, what would be the next evolution on Bonfire?
Yeah, yeah. And I'm going to ask you the same question after Bonfire 3 is done. After a couple of weeks. I'm like, okay, Duke, we're getting all this feedback. Like, what's next? Because I want to know too, because I'll be in this with you as a learner. So I also want to know what's post evolution of Bonfire. What does it mean for you and for all of us who are in this course together?
That's the other thing, though. I will say it goes back to Krishnamurti and beauty of not knowing. I'm very comfortable not knowing. I know a lot of people that creates angst, but I'm I'm good with it because if I'm doing the work, really thinking about other things, I think things emerge for me that I'm like, okay, that makes sense. But I'm not someone who's ever written out a plan like this is the trajectory of things. Like, in fact, I have a history of making very irrational decisions over the course of my career, but for me, it's very rational. Um, but I like not knowing. I really do. I think in life, and once again, everyone's different, but for me, it's like we've been conditioned to think, okay, there's these doors, there's door for your life. And I'm like, I think there's doors all on the periphery that I have a blind spot to. And so my whole thing is like, what's my behavior in perspective and allows me to see these other doors? Maybe I'm doing something I never thought of, like I never would have considered. I want to be open to that.
As they say in my world, open to outcome and not attached to it. And as I'm hearing you say comfortable with not knowing and thinking possibility, I'm thinking curiosity, I'm thinking inquiry, I'm thinking I have all this data post, but I'm still going to be in this mode of constant curiosity, inquiry, and learning. And like I said, not attached to outcome, but open to.
Yeah, I love that. Absolutely. 100%.
Okay, tell me, what's your favorite food? I don't think I know this.
My favorite food. Gosh, that's a hard one, Deepa, because I don't know if I have like a,
What?
okay. My favorite food, well, it's changed now, but it was because my mom would make it on my birthday. I grew up in Chicago, and in Chicago, when we have pizza, it's thick pizza.
Oh, there's
It's
Chicago
like,
thick pizza. Yes, yes, yes.
yeah, you would go to the restaurant, you have to order 45 minutes in advance because that's how long it takes to get the pizza. But I do love when and now I don't eat meat, so it's different ingredients. But I love deep dish pizza, especially if it's like a autumn or winter day. I'll be like, yeah, deep dish sounds really, really good.
Warm deep dish pizza.
Yeah,
Well, where do you go for a deep dish pizza in our area?
you don't. So, okay, what happens is actually the girls, Molly and my daughters, for my birthday, they'll make me deep dish because my mom used to do that. And so
That's so lovely.
yeah. I do love it though. It's like, and I think it's just because of the ritual memories of the youth. And
Yeah, yeah. Well, Duke, what's your recipe for life? If somebody were to come and ask you, Duke, what's your recipe for life? What would you say?
I'd say a splash of curiosity, a pinch of moxie, a good spoonful of humility and maybe a cup of empathy and compassion.
Love that. Love that. And I feel like all these things can never lead you the wrong way.
Yeah, I think that's right, Deepa. And then there's the things that I need to acknowledge that can lead. I think being aware of the role of ego in life.
Yeah, but you'll explore all of that. You'll be curious about all of that. But if you just boil down to these 5 things that you mentioned, and you do all your exploration, it still won't steer you in the wrong way. It really wouldn't.
Yeah, I agree with. Also, I don't want to give the impression there's a lot of imperfection in my life, so sometimes those ingredients, as my yogi friend would say, it's okay to be beautifully imperfect.
All right, Duke, on that note, thank you so much for coming on the show with me, for having this lovely conversation. I can't thank you enough.
Deepa, anytime with you, I really enjoy. I just love your infectious, magnetic personality, and I don't know, you have a really fascinating look at life. And so I'm just grateful for the opportunity to connect and be in conversation. So thank you.
Well, one of the things I do have to tell my audience really quick is Duke, whenever Duke and I meet, he always just pulls my legs. So it's actually the first hour and 20 minutes he hasn't, which is kind of wow.
I know. There wasn't really a moment. It didn't feel right. Yeah, no, it's fun to just joke with one another. I think that's the other thing is just, didn't talk about it, but what's the role of laughter and fun in this entire thing? And I do like to bring that forth a lot. So yeah, my apologies, quote unquote, picking on you at times. It's deep love and caring.
Absolutely. I always enjoy those. As much as I may pretend that I don't, I do. So we'll do what we do. All right, Duke. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Deepa.
Hey, this is Deepa again. I hope you really enjoyed my show today. Thank you so much for listening to our conversation. If you'd love to get in touch with me or my guest, or would like the show notes, resources, or links, please reach out to me on my website. I would also love your feedback. Until next time.